What if the joyful fair hid a witch stealing souls? Welcome to AI Horror Stories. Have you ever thought that a happy fair could be hiding a witch who steals souls? The story of the Witch of Pajijayapan, where behind the glitter of lights and the sweet sound of music lies a terrible secret. Do you dare to find out what happened at that fair? Story name is The Witch of Pajijayapan. Deep in a dark forest, near a small town, lies an abandoned fair. They say that many years ago, when the lights flickered and the music filled the air with a joyful melody, an evil shadow hid among the attractions. I am the one who could tell the story of the Witch of the Fair. I remember the first time I saw it. It was a cloudy and slightly cold night, the air was charged with a strange energy. The flickering lights barely managed to dissipate the darkness that enveloped the fair. The music, instead of making me happy, sent a chill down my spine. I found myself alone, walking through the deserted corridors, when I saw her for the first time. She was a twisted and hunched figure, with a black robe that dragged on the floor. His hair, as dark as the night itself, frames a pale and wrinkled face, with bright, penetrating eyes that seemed to read my soul. A sinister laugh rang through the air as the witch stared at me. "What are you doing here, little one?" he asked in a voice that sounded like a mix of whisper and creak. I tried to move, but my legs seemed to be rooted to the ground. I was snooping, I managed to stammer. The witch let out a louder laugh, a laugh that echoed in my mind. No, I was just walking," I said stutteringly, feeling the fear engulf me even more. A cold wind began to blow, causing the lights to flicker even more erratically. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them again, the witch had disappeared. My heart was pounding as I walked away from the fair and ran back to the town. They say that those who were caught by his gaze were swept away to an unknown fate, a fate from which they never returned. Over the years, my curiosity and fascination with the story of the fair which only grew. Even though I stayed away from that dark place, I always felt there was something else I didn't know. It was on a rainy afternoon, while sitting in my grandmother's kitchen, that I finally learned the full story behind the legend. My grandmother, a woman with silver hair and full eyes of wisdom, he noticed my lost look and asked me what was happening to me, while he stirred his cup of tea. I told him about the abandoned fair and the witch who was said to lurk in its shadows. She sighed and stopped stirring her tea, looking at me with a melancholy expression, and began to tell me what had really happened. That old woman said that many years ago, when she was just a little girl, the local fair was not an abandoned and sinister place, but a place full of joy and fun. He took a sip of his tea before continuing. He mentioned that there was a dark time when the children began to mysteriously disappear. Fathers and mothers cried desperately for the loss of their little ones. The townspeople were terrified and looked for answers everywhere. My grandmother paused for a moment, as if she remembered with sadness those difficult times, because it was stated that the fair was cursed, that a witch had taken up residence there and was stealing the children. The stories were so chilling that parents avoided taking their children there, and soon the fair was empty and forgotten. Investigations and searches were carried out, but they were never found concrete clues about what had happened to the children. The legends only grew with time, and the fair fell into abandonment. People began to avoid her, and over time, everyone stopped talking about the place. My grandmother took a moment to drink more of her tea, and then continued with a serious look in her eyes, saying that she would never. It was discovered what became of the missing children. Some said that the witch had taken them to another world, while others claimed that they had gotten lost in the shadows of the fair. Whatever the truth, the story of the Witch of the Fair became a warning for the curious and a shadow in the memory of the town. I nodded, taking in my grandmother's words. The story made more sense now, but it had also become even scarier. Knowing that the children had disappeared without a trace in that cursed place filled me with concern. Despite my grandmother's warning and the dark story surrounding the abandoned fair, a concern persistent had taken root in me. I felt like I had to face my fear and unravel the mystery of what had really happened to the missing children. So one night, when the moon shone high and the wind rustled in the trees, I ventured back to the fair. The lights flickered with a dim, ghostly glow, and the air was charged with an oppressive feeling. As I walked deeper into the decrepit attractions, I could feel the invisible eyes of the witch watching. My heart was pounding and my mind was fighting against the dark thoughts that tried to invade my reason. I arrived at the entrance of a tent, which seemed to be the epicenter of the darkness that surrounded the place. I paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, before deciding to enter. The interior was shrouded in shadows and only the intermittent lights of the fair dimly illuminated the place. There were worn-out figures of dolls, broken objects and an air of total abandonment. The wooden floor as I walked forward, feeling like something was watching me from the darkest corners. Suddenly, a cold breeze passed by me, like an icy sigh. The same sinister laughter I had heard before crept into my ears, making my skin crawl. "Gustavo," whispered a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I froze in place, my heart beating even faster. The voice had mentioned my name, and a sense of presence was present in the air. I turned slowly to find a figure in the shadows, a figure I knew all too well from descriptions and legends. It was the witch, her dark robes billowing around her as she advanced toward me with a crooked smile. His bright eyes locked onto mine, and I felt as if he were looking directly through my soul. That sinister being asked me with a serene but powerful voice what I was doing there. I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm as I responded to the witch who wanted to know what happened to the children. The witch stopped in front of me, her smile slowly fading away, answering that the children had been taken to a place beyond this world. A place where time does not follow the same rules and desires take strange forms. The answer perplexed me, but I also felt a wave of inflammation asking what had happened there and if they were still alive. The witch seemed contemplative for a moment, as if she were remembering a time that had already passed. She answered that they were still alive, but not in the sense that I understood. She mentioned that their souls were trapped in a corner of reality, a space between what is and what could have been. I looked at the witch, trying to understand her words. "Can I do something to help?" The dark figure moved towards me, its intense and penetrating gaze told me that I could try, but keep in mind that the balance between worlds is fragile and wishes can have unpredictable consequences. Before he could ask any more questions, the witch began to fade into the shadows. "Remember, Gustavo, deep mysteries are rarely fully revealed. The path she has chosen is dangerous, but if you are willing to risk everything, perhaps you will find the truth you seek." The witch's last words echoed in the air as she disappeared into complete. I found myself alone in the dark tent, with more questions than answers. I knew that I had begun a path full of uncertainty and danger, but I also felt that I had to continue forward in search of the missing children and the answers that had eluded the town for so long. I investigated every corner of the fair, following fragmented clues and forgotten whispers that seemed to guide me toward a grim revelation. One night, while exploring one of the more deteriorated attractions, I noticed something unusual beneath the stage of an old ride. Ring toss. As I carefully lifted it, my eyes widened at the sight that revealed itself before me, a series of small makeshift graves, each marked with a name and a date. My heart ached. It stopped as I bent down to read the names carved into the wood. They were the names of the missing children, the same names that had been forgotten by time and sadness. The dates on the tombstone suggested that decades had passed since their disappearances, and the sadness and pain of that time seemed to weigh on me. Reality hit me hard. The children had been there all this time, under the fair that was once a place of laughter and joy. A mixture of anger and sadness washed over me as I knelt by the graves, as if I were paying homage to the lost spirits. As I reflected on what I had discovered, a feeling of presence began to fill the air. The cold breeze returned to caress my skin, and the same sinister laughter that I had heard before echoed in the wind. I stood up, looking around cautiously. Many years ago, we went to visit my husband's town, located in the state of Chiapas, called Pijijayapan. Many soldiers come to this place, and during the day you see many, but at night they avoid going out. There are few who see each other, since they only go out for what is essential. This is because there are many rumors that claim that witches exist in that town. The residents firmly comment that among them there are women who become witches at night and go out to get married, as well as nawalis, but these according to them, become animals that especially attack the livestock of the residents to eat their meat and drink their blood. At that time I had just given birth to my first child, and we took him so that my in-laws could meet him. When we arrived everything was normal, but when night came my mother-in-law put a head of garlic, some scissors under my baby's pillow, as well as a bag of salt, this to prevent the witches from trying to take it, because she told us that the witches smell newborn babies without baptizing to take them and drink their blood, because with this, they acquire more strength. I also remember that she prepared a jar with grain salt, a red ribbon and a prayer of the Magnificent. She commented that with the latter, if she heard that the witch was walking on the roof, she would make a circle of go out and begin to weave the ribbon. Later I would say the prayer, and when finished the witch would fall into the circle, and consequently I would tie her until she revealed where the stove was where she had hidden her feet. Well, claimed that when they become witches, before leaving they take off their feet to be able to fly, but they leave them hidden in a pile of coal, and therefore, if they do not manage to find their feet again, they could no longer return to normal, and therefore they would wander at night until they dry out. Of course, hearing all this causes some fear and confusion, since in the capital you can hardly see anything. Fortunately, the first night passed without any news, but the next I heard that my mother-in-law was fighting with someone, so I didn't want to be inopportune and decided not to go out and see. The next day my mother-in-law woke up with bruises on her arms and scratches, this because she told us that at night the witch had been hanging around the houses and that she had a confrontation with her. That seemed quite strange to me, but I actually felt a little scared when I heard this. She told us that so that this would not happen again in the future we had to baptize our baby as soon as possible, since that way, however, they cannot take children who had already been baptized. I sarcastically commented to him that we were not going to baptize him until he was young, so that he would be a responsible person and aware of his own decisions, and that while she was a baby I would put the scissors and salt on her, since when she was young they would not do anything to her. She gave me an obviously annoyed look and asked me to sit next to her while she made tortillas, and he was telling me something that happened a few years ago in the town. He began the story by telling me that as I had noticed upon my arrival in the town there lived quite a few guachos, soldiers, who came from many places, and like everything when men feel alone, they look for the company of women, but what they did not know is that the existence of witches also predominated in that place. He told me that one day among those soldiers a very handsome young man arrived, which is why he stood out among the guys, but he had something else in particular that, for his bad luck, would attract the attention of the witches, which was that he was never baptized. Something that made him even more special to them, so as you can imagine he became the bone of contention for all of them, until one of them devised a way to get closer to that young man. One day when the boy was on guard in his camp, he saw a very beautiful young woman with a humble appearance but attractive in his eyes. She saw him but only limited herself to greeting him, and he kindly responded to her greeting, watching her leave, so every time he was on guard, the beautiful young woman passed by and greeted him. As the days went by, the boy began to have an interest in the beautiful young woman, so one afternoon he approached her and asked her out. The slightly shy girl asked him. She said that she had to ask her father's permission to go out, and that if he accepted then she would go out with him. That's what they were doing, when suddenly she began to feel a strange discomfort, so she quickly said goodbye. They passed some days and the beautiful woman did not appear, nor was there any sign of her, so the boy imagined that perhaps she had been upset by the invitation and that perhaps he would not see her again, but suddenly in the distance he managed to make out a silhouette of someone familiar, and to his surprise, it was that young woman whom he had invited out a few days ago. She slowly approached him to greet him as always, and to his pleasant surprise the girl had not forgotten the young man's last request, so he accepted the invitation to go out. While they were talking, the boy expressed his doubts about his sudden disappearance in those days, to which she told him that she had not been able to go out during that period because her father was very sick, so she had to stay at home to take care of him until he felt much better. She told him that during those 4 days he had not stopped thinking about him and how much he wanted to see him again. The young man at that moment felt hypnotized in some way by the chaotic beauty that his eyes contemplated in front of him. Thus time passed, and with it an immense love grew between them, to the extent that the young man dreamed of sharing the rest of his life with that woman who had enchanted him at all times. One day he decided to ask this girl to marry him, getting a positive response, she seemed very excited about the proposal and he asked her to take him to meet her family in order to give it total seriousness. Commitment, but mysteriously, the woman responded that it would be later, since first she had to talk to them and prepare them for the great news they were going to receive, since the event was a little sudden for her and it would be more for her parents. One day the girl arrived with a small box in which she had some clothes and cried inconsolably, alleging that her parents did not agree with the relationship they had, much less with the marriage union, so she told the boy that the only way she found to continue the relationship was for them to live together without getting married, since if it wasn't that way, they would never grant her permission to join sacramentally with him, as God commands. The boy, very overwhelmed by seeing his girlfriend so hurt and heartbroken, accepted without hesitation or asking more questions, and that is how they went to live together. The boy quickly found a small house to live with his girlfriend. She carried a small bag in which she carried several woven bracelets. She took one and placed it on his left wrist as a symbol of their union and eternal love, since she claimed that it was something symbolic for both of them not having been able to carry out the formal ceremony with rings, ribbons and everything that entails such a sublime moment for lovers. Apparently everything was going well in the young couple, but as the days went by, the boy felt very tired. In fact, his physical appearance began to deteriorate. He always looked weak and discouraged. Sometimes he had strange dizziness and had begun to vomiting a swampy black-looking substance. His battalion companions began to notice his physical and emotional change, and even his deterioration began to worry one of his closest friends, who recommended that he stay in the battalion for a few days till he could recover and medical tests would be carried out to find out what could be happening to him. The battalion doctor performed various tests on him, but he was never able to diagnose anything in particular, because in the tests everything seemed fine with him. Commented that he only saw him quite fatigued and decided that the best solution was to give him vitamins and some rest.